Hello, my name is Joshua Pickle. This is my submission for the Computer Science 499 Milestone 1, which is a code review. Um, First off, I'd like to apologize for any background noise. I live right next to a playground, and the neighborhood kids really like to scream and yell. So that might come up in the audio. If that does come up in the audio like that, I apologize if that is disruptive. So first off, what does the code do? The code is an old CS-340 project. It was Project 2, which was the final project of the class, and the purpose of the class was to build a page for a database. So first off, I had to have this logo here, had to have the name, had to have my name on it. I had to have these selectable options right here that would help me sort the data. So there's water rescue, mountain rescue, disaster rescue, and resets. With resets taking me back to the full database. There is a pie chart here that I added that shows the makeup of the preferred animals. So if I go to disaster rescue, then you can see all the different breeds of this specific results, where it limited it to German Shepherd, Golden Retriever, Doberman Pinscher, Rottweiler, Bloodhound. Additionally, there is an error here. This project, unfortunately, in its current state, does not fill out all of the requirements of the project. I do not believe I aced this project. If I remember correctly, there is also supposed to be a map in this area right here. That's just not showing up. The code is there, but it is flawed somehow. It probably has something to do with this, where it's an index error. So right off the bat, with the inspection checklist, I can say that the code does not completely and correctly implement the design. In addition, it does not check for the end of the list. I'm not sure which list it is that's throwing this error. It happens every time I add a filter or anything. So this will need to be fixed before the final project is complete, before the capstone project is completed. In addition, I can also sort the entries by lowest value to highest value, vice versa, for any given column. So say I want to sort by each outcoming weeks, then I can just do this and it'll sort highest to lowest, lowest to highest, or just back to the default, which has it sorted by the animal ID. So yes, this was for a project that was supposed to be modeling a essentially like an animal recruitment agency for disaster relief and stuff like that. So that is category 1. Category 2 is to look at, I'm also going to look at the following code, I guess. So there's two main modules. There is the CRUD Python module, which gives all of the methods for the basic connection to MongoDB. So there is a constructor. There's constructors here to gain access to this, and then there is create. There's also this method which is connected here to find the next record number so that I can create the new method. There is a read method to read an entry within the database. There is an update method to update one of the existing entries or many of the entries in the database. And there is the delete method to delete a number of entries from within the database. And then there is that is the crud.py file, and then there is the main file, which is the project2 dashboard.ipynb. I did use some ChatGPT for bug fixing for, if I remember correctly, both of these. That was purely bug fixing that didn't really apply to the final version of the code. My code's a little bit too unique for that. But it was mainly just figuring out things that just weren't working with the language. I was very unfamiliar with the language. If I remember correctly, this was my first time in Python. And so it was just figuring out, hey, what might cause this sort of issue to arise? But at the same time, I still wanted to credit that ChatGPT was used for this. And given that I was able to pass the class, the professor was fine. Evidently, the professor was fine with me using ChatGPT, although I am 99% sure that I asked if I could use ChatGPT at some point. For bug fixing specifically. Anyway, getting back to the code itself. We got a bunch of imports here to get everything set up for the dashboard to be able to run within Jupyter. We've got the import for the animal shelter. We've got the sign-in requirements to log into MongoDB. We got the actual reference to the CRUD Python module back here. And then from there, we've got the setup of the page itself. So we've got the app startup, we've got the image. I'm totally aware that there's a lot of errors in here. I will get to that at the next step. So this sets up the image, the text, the radio buttons for the various options that you can choose to sort the table by. The data table itself, and all of this, as well as the graph, which will be further gone through down there, and what should be the map. That still needs to be fixed. This is the implementation of the radio buttons, so it sets up the query that appears when the buttons are pressed, and as such allows the page to update to meet the query requirements. So as you can see, we got a water rescue, mountain rescue, disaster rescue, and reset. I got the turn here to finish that all off. This sets up the graph. So here I decided to set up a pie chart. It was pretty simple. Nothing too complicated there. This sets up the background color for the page. And then this is where I'm going to need to do a lot more work through here. This sets up the map that is not working. So I will be doing work here to try to get that map working before the end of the capstone. So this will not be what this ends up looking like. And then we've got the function to run the server. So basically, after all that stuff set up, this actually gets the Dash application running to set up the page as we know it right here. Okay, so I think that covers what did the code do and the functions and features of the existing code, so we can move on to the code analysis. So, as I mentioned in the paper about what I'm going to do in this code review, I have set up bookmarks to kind of help me remember where everything is. So the sidebar is just kind of going to let me know where everything is, and I'm going to kind of go from there. So right off the start of the bat, this line right here was a line that the professor put here, just saying what it was. This no longer applies to the code, as it is now no longer inserting a document, but rather is a full-blown CRUD module, meaning it can create, read, update, and delete. So this should be updated if I'm going to include a header, which I generally do in all of my coding these days. It should include all of the things that the code can do rather than just one of the functions that it used to be able to do. This is an out-of-date comment, which doesn't really line up with the is the code well structured. Yeah, I think is the code well structured, consistently styled, and consistently formatted. No, it was are all comments consistent with the code. It was that one. I apologize. I'm kind of doing this off the cuff a little bit. So that's an issue with the comments. There are going to be a lot of issues with the comments moving forward. This seems like it is unnecessary. I didn't test this one just because I was afraid that I was going to remove all the bookmarks. I've experienced a little bit of a bug where the bookmarks became unaligned when I update the code in any way. I don't really want to mess with that too much. I will later, once I am done with this code review, test this, see if it needs to be here. If it does not need to be here, it is out. So that's the compiler seems to think, well, the Visual Studio seems to think that this is not necessary. I'm going to double check, but that does not seem to be consistent with redundant or unused variables. It seems like there's not. This seems like this variable is not being used. Next up is this function right here, this constructor. You might have seen in the original IPy, to connect to it, there are two parameters being passed here, whereas this is a constructor for one. The IPy is the only place where this code is where a constructor is being accessed. And so as such, this is not ever being accessed. I kind of like having it around just in case somebody else needs to reference this CRUD Python module. If I remember correctly, one of the goals with that previous class was so that this module could be reusable in other projects. And so having two methods would be helpful for that, just to meet different needs. But for now, this is an unnecessary function, which does not need to be here. So overall, this seems to be pretty okay and consistent. Right here. Here I have a complete function that is now commented out. It is another form of the constructor that I used in a very early form of the project that contains all of the connection variables in the parameters. But given that it isn't being used clearly as it's in comment, it's just taking a space at the moment. This doesn't need to be here. I don't really see a need where we'd have a constructor which contains all of the connection variables and the parameters. So this is unnecessary. I'm going to complain about this a lot in my current version of the code. Unnecessary white space. There's a lot of inconsistent white space around here. So this is where we get into the well-structured, consistent in style, consistently formatted. One of the big issues that I have with my code is that the white space is not consistent in this project. So there's 2 lines here where there's usually, like right here, a 1 line of white space. This is just kind of an inconsistency right here. Once again, line 72, we have a comment that no longer meets what the current code is doing. So here, the professor, I kind of gave myself a to-do here of creating a method to return the next available record number, yada, yada, yada. And I just didn't update this to more so be a present tense. This method returns the next available record number. It's kind of a nitpick, but it's definitely something that should be changed. Next up, line 79. This seems like this should be simplifiable. I'm not sure I need a loop here. The current point of this is to send all of the stuff within the last record details into a last record dictionary. There are methods of the cursor objects that could do this in 1 line rather than 2. So this seems like it's something that could be simplified. So if I can find it, there is. Are there any blocks of repeated code that could be? I think it was this one. Yes, it was something like that. This does not need to be here. It can just be 1 line of code rather than 2. Line 83 is format. So I have an inconsistency here, which is once again an issue with the style, where this integer cast is in parentheses, whereas this one it's not. Sorry, this one is not in parentheses, whereas this one is, and it just doesn't really need to be like that. Next up, line 84. This times here is touching the parentheses, whereas every other operator is not touching, has white space on both sides. There's this plus here, this integer division here. So yeah, just a little bit of white space here to create consistency is ideal. Line 101 right here, we have an uncalled return function because the exception will just stop everything within this if statement. If I remember correctly, I just added this return statement because my editing software was yelling at me about not having a return statement, and I just didn't want to deal with that. So this can be removed now that I'm doing this in Visual Studio Code. 105. We've got 2 lines of code here with a variable that is not necessary when I can just return this method right here rather than setting a variable to this value and then returning the variable when we can just return the value. Down here, 116. I'm not sure I really need this variable. I can just call length of the list of the read results. We get it right here. We can just add it right here and just completely skip over the need for this variable. This variable is entirely unnecessary. Does not need to be there. And finally, just like the issue on line 101, we have an unnecessary return statement that just was me trying to get the editing software to stop yelling at me. But now that I'm working here, I can just remove it. And now I need to move a little bit quicker because it's already been 20 minutes. We have the Project 2 dashboard, which has a couple more issues, but a lot of them are repetitive. First off, there's the thing I mentioned in the previous module where I typically like to have header comments. And in addition, this code has a header comment, and this code does not, other than the use ChatGPT for some bug fixing. It's just an inconsistency that, once again, does not meet the consistent in style and consistently formatted that the code review checklist requests. I actually did test this code. State here is not necessary. The import of the OS routines is not necessary. Importing NumPy is not necessary, and importing PyPlot is not necessary, at least with the code in its current state. I'm not really sure why this is here. Maybe it's for the map stuff. I need to look more into that. But in the code in its current state, all of that is unnecessary and can be removed, and the code works perfectly fine. Here is comments that I forgot to remove. It is another outdated comment where it is a fix me. It has been fixed. So therefore, there's no need for a fix me comment. Like the previous thing, there's unnecessary white space here that just simply does not meet the rest of the code. So like right here, there's no white space here after the comment, there's no white space here after the comment, so there should be no white space here after the comment, because that would be inconsistent. Here, there's no capitalization here, which is, again, inconsistent with the rest of the document. Just capitalize right here. Here we have leftover testing code, which, as we see, is a leftover test routine that, while not running, it does not need to be there. So we can just remove this. Here, the 2 lines of white space strikes again. We only need 1 line of white space right here to maintain consistency with the rest of the project. So we remain consistent in style. Another fix me here that is out of date. The image is right here. It is now working. The same issue is right here. I did add the image. It's working fine. So all of this can be instead changed to more descriptive comments rather than an outdated fix me. Once again, we have 3 lines of white space right here, which is unnecessary. There should only be 1 line of white space to maintain consistency. Outdated fix me's. These now meet the requirements, and so don't need to be there. This was just outdated code. This does not need to be here. This can be removed. This was an issue with the indentation to maintain consistency with style. This should be up here because, well, on this line right here. So it should be an additional tab because indentation should follow the previous, should follow the opening, the location of the opening parentheses, so it should be right here rather than down here. Once again, there's 2 lines of white space right here, should be 1. Once again, there's another fix me. That does not need to be a fix me. It's fixed now. And once again with this one, this is another style issue. All of these parameters are down here, whereas previous parameters were brought up to meet up with the same level of the previous parameters. So this is a parameter and that dips down here. All of these parameters should be up rather than down here. Do, 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 do. This was line 105. This comment should be indented just like the rest of the comments that are meeting up with the code, such as right here. It did down here. So this should be up. Right here is another indentation error. These are all elements of this array, and so as such should be up from where they are, rather than down here. Because the array ends down here, all this should be moved up beyond where it currently is. There's an unnecessary line of white space right here between these parameters and this closing parentheses. I'm not really sure why these comments are here when they're just this right here. I think I messed with these lines of code at some point. Regardless, these lines of code do not need to be, these lines of comments do not need to be here. They can be deleted, and they're just taking up space at the moment. This should be moved up to meet with the indentation of where it was opened. We're right here. In addition, this should be indented up as well. This should be probably, it shouldn't be on this line. This is inconsistent. It should probably be moved up to meet with children. And kind of finishes off the whole string of indentation problems here. Here we have 4 lines of unnecessary white space. We have a remaining fix me and 2 additional lines of white space code. Comments that do not need to be here. 146. This stuff is indented too far by one tab, so all of this stuff can be brought down. This to maintain consistency with the rest of the indentation. 147. I'm thinking I could probably have just done these all as functions. So these 3 right here are all the same thing. They just have different read queries that they work through. So instead, this could be a function taking your read query and doing all this stuff. And that doesn't meet up with the requirement 2. This could be taken down to a single procedure like this. Once again, unnecessary white space comments. Once again, outdated fix me that could just be a descriptor rather than describing what I need to do. There's an additional line of white space right here. There should be 1, not 2 lines of white space to maintain consistency. This one, I'm not sure about. The video that you had us watch about this sort of thing, it seems to indicate that this is fine given that these descriptors are here. But this does seem like some magic number issue. Right here, magic number, where these columns are very specific numbers. So it might be preferable to have constants instead. Name constants instead that are easier to keep track of rather than having these comments right here. On these 2 lines right here, there should be white space in between these 2 parameters, as well as these two, etc., as well as these 2. To keep consistent, the issue actually applies here, now that I'm noticing. Every other time there's been a parameter, there's been a space or a new line, such as back here. It also appears right here. So there should be an additional space to keep things consistent. Once again, there's an additional space right here. And this was a style point that my professor for CS-340 had, where he didn't want us to exceed, I think it was 90 characters on a single line, might have been 100. I can't fully remember. Regardless, this comment does not fit the consistency that all of the rest of code's been following, where they will exit to a new line rather than go this distance where you have to scroll to read it. So it should just be 2 lines rather than 1, so that it can all be read without having to scroll. And with that, we've reached the end of both programs, of all the things that could be improved. I couldn't really find any other issues. The variables seem to be named fine. The types seem to be consistent and were casted correctly. It never checks for floating points, equality. It never really needs to round. And just generally stuff like that. A lot of those suggestions don't really apply to this code. So I just decided to point out all of the issues I noticed that I will need to fix. So that should take out the B section to review the code. So finally, and I apologize, I am where I'm at 34 minutes currently. I will try to wrap up quickly. There are the practical enhancements. To kind of wrap all this up, I believe, if I read this correctly, in addition with all the stuff previously, I do want to add the things for each of the sections. So for the software design, I want to add a login section. So if I go back here, I want there to be a page before this one that just asks the user to log in to be able to access all of this stuff. just because this does seem to have some sensitive information like exact locations. And in addition, I also want to create small question mark buttons next to potentially confusing items in the database page that, when clicked, open pop-ups that appear to clarify what certain things are so that the page is more beginner-friendly. So, for example, a user just coming into this page, kind of a novice to the organization, isn't going to really know what water rescue or mountain rescue really means. Age of outcome upon outcome in weeks can also be a bit confusing and stuff like that. And so just nice question mark buttons to let an inquiring user know what each of these things are would probably be very helpful with this program. Next, when it comes to the algorithms, I want to create a more advanced search feature. Something I forgot to mention earlier, and I apologize, is you can also search for a specific value. So, for example, if I search here for Bella, there is only one dog named Bella right here. Additionally, if I want to only find all the intact females, then I do intact female, and it shows all of the intact females. Instead of only being able to do specific values, I want to be able to do ranges. For example, if I wanted to only do animals with an age of outcome in weeks of between 52 and 104, I can narrow it down to that range. Or if for some reason I wanted to narrow down the names of animals to those that are between Bella and Max, so that there's nothing alphabetically beyond Max or before Bella, then I can narrow that down as well. So that's generally what I mean by being allowed to search by ranges. I want to kind of expand that functionality while also being efficient with all that. And finally, all of this data currently is coming from MongoDB. So in the Python module, you can see that I'm connecting via Mongo client with all of these connection variables and all that to get into MongoDB. I actually have all the data right here, where in MongoDB Compass. Instead, I want it to be in SQL instead. I want to challenge myself to see what I can do in terms of converting the program. So that's going to mean converting all of this data into SQL data, what that means, as well as change the connection items so that it connects to SQL instead of MongoDB. And finally, as I mentioned in this page, the purposes of these are that the Flask login is to allow for the security outcome, develop a security mindset that anticipates adversarial exploits in software architecture and designs to expose potential vulnerabilities, mitigate design flaws, and ensure privacy and enhance security of data and resources. In addition, the question mark buttons are designed to meet course outcome 1 and 2, where I can employ strategies for building collaborative environments that enable diverse audiences to support organizational decision-making in the field of computer science, And course outcome number 2, design, develop, and deliver professional, quality, oral, written, and visual communications that are coherent, technically sound, and appropriately adapted to specific audiences and contexts. Next, the purpose of the search algorithm, the search system that's more advanced. The purposes of it is to meet course outcome number 3, design and evaluate computing solutions that solve a given problem with using algorithmic principles and computer science practices and standards appropriate to its solution while managing the trade-offs involved in design choices. And then finally, the purpose of the category 3 databases change from MongoDB to SQL or SQL is to meet course outcome number 4, demonstrate an ability to use well-founded and innovative techniques, skills, and tools in computing practices for the purpose of implementing computer solutions that deliver value and accomplish industry-specific goals. The videos that we watched in week 1 actually suggested the possibility of changing a thing from one system to another for this specific outcome, and so I decided to go through with that. And with that, I believe that should be all of the requirements for the code review. Once again, this has been Joshua Pickle, completing milestone 1 with the code review. Thank you for your time.